Video we will see how we can play with the stream data, how we can also fetch data from a time series database, and we'll try to do some very simple use cases at the very beginning, and as the time progresses we'll get into the more complicated and even more interesting use cases. So let me start with the very first one. What I'm going to do now is that I will be just pushing data. So nothing fancy, I'm not starting any rule yet. I'm just pushing some data. So let's say for a device test, I'll be pushing data like 20, 21, 8, and so forth. I will actually see here that we are over time storing this data in our time series database. Now, first thing I will do is to try to see how we can use the stream node, in this case function node, for stream processing. I have to say that this template is kind of busy, but we will go at one use case at a time. So what this function node does, it basically fetches the stream data, in this particular case a temperature, and it will do threshold crossing here, which we have set for 20. And let me just zoom in that part only so that you don't get distracted by other things. And let me just start this template for a resource that I have set up here, test. And as you see here a $sign, that means it is going to bind that function to that payload. You see that bold sign, which means it's going to react when the data stream arrives. And as I push here 8, we'll see it will be below threshold. And similarly, if I push something like 21, we'll see it will be above a threshold. Now, the next thing I will actually do is to find another interesting use case where I'm going to just check what happens if the function node, in this particular case, this one, goes from above to any other state. So what I'm going to do, let me do it again, I will take a transition node and do it this way. If it goes from above to any other state, I'm going to just have a temperature dialog which is going to tell me that temperature has dropped. All right, so let me do that. I'm going to start again this task. I will look at this time in debugger because I have here a dialog box or other logger. And let me first make it that it goes above a threshold. If it goes again above a threshold, nothing is going to happen. But if I put that to, let's say, 20, it's going to be then going from above to equal. And because of that, we have here the logger saying the temperature has dropped. Okay, so that was this one. So let's now look at some other functions. In the next one, I'm going to look at this one here. We will actually look at the stream data and see when the temperature drops for 1 degree between 2 consecutive measurements. And for that, we will not look at the time series database. We just look at the stream data. So let's see what happens here. We're going to take a stream data temperature and use another notation for a function node. Reason being that we would like to pick up data from the memory, and then we have to use another notation. This notation here is equivalent of this one here for this node. Why is that? Because this is a global space for only that given node. And again, I could have used both notations, but let me just keep this one here. And what does it mean is that I will take a current temperature and subtract that from the previous one, and just going to look if that is above 1. So let me then start again. I will look at now this thing here, and I will take first a temperature 20, and then the first thing that we see basically is that the sensor has failed because we need 2 measurements. And if I put now 23 as the next measurement, what you're going to see that will be the delta function will above, because the value it's actually 23 minus 20, which is actually 3, which is higher than threshold 1. And if I again press now 23, you'll see now it will be below that because now the delta is just 0. So that was that function. Now let's go a little bit further and look at, for instance, this guy here. This one, it's basically saying I would like to get a maximum value over the past 3 samples which have arrived as a stream data, and I would like to actually see that being higher than 10. So again, here what we're doing is that we're trying to find if within these 3 samples there is at least one which is higher than 10. Okay, so let me start again with something smaller than that. So let me start it again. So we are focusing on this function here, and we put something like 2. We put 2, oops, and we put 22, and we'll see here that we are above the threshold because the maximum value of the past 3 sample, the one was actually 22, which meant it was above 10. The next thing we hear here is that twice above. What is this one doing? It executes every time after the maximum function has executed. And what are we doing here? We are using another formula of the function node, which is to say, look at the state of this previous node, and if I see twice above in a sequence, then I know that this function has executed twice with the state above. And let me now put 22 again. And we'll see now it's equal, meaning that we had once a sequence of above, and because of that, we have also pushed here a message that indeed we got twice state of this guy being above. There are other ways to do that, but let me just now go for the min function, just one more time to see that. What this one is doing, it's looking for the min of the 3 last samples, and it tries to see whether this is again above a threshold. So let me then now push some small values, 2, 2, 2, and we see indeed that 3 times we are below threshold. And if I put now something like 20, of course, we have to put 3 times. Again, I'm getting confused because there is at least 2 samples which are actually below 20. So let me push one more. Okay, so here we are above a threshold because again, what we see now is that we had 3 samples and the minimum value for the past 3 samples, all of them were above threshold. All right, so the next thing we will do is I will look at this one. Now what are we doing here? We are actually counting the number of times the function state was above a threshold for the past 3 samples. And here what I want to put here is 3, which means that only if I have 3 times this function above the state, this one will actually be in equal state. So let me do that. Let me make sure that I have first something below. And let me now push temperature 23 3 times. All right, it's first time, the second time, and the third time. We should notice now that you're getting to equal, which means that we have found the moment when this function returned 3 times above state. All right, now the next thing I will do is that I will look at the top one here. Okay, this is an interesting one because it enables us to do something like look at the data in the future. So for instance, you have a CO2 which is above a threshold, you would like to turn on airco or open a window, and then after maybe 10 or 15 minutes, you would like to check whether the CO2 has actually dropped. So what we have here is that we will take a function here and trigger that if it's above threshold. Then we'll have a delay sensor. What this actually going to do, it's going to wait for 5 seconds before it triggers the next node. This node will then look at the time series for that sensor. For the stored time series of a temperature, we'll pick up the same measurement just for a test in window of the last 10 seconds. All right, so and if there is a data, then we check that the data within that, the minimum value, it's at least above 15 degrees. So again, what you're going to do is that you're going to trigger the function on above state. Maybe just for this test, to not confuse ourselves way too much, is that I'm going to delete that and just execute it always. So what I'm going to do now, I'll always execute the delete sensor when the function node evaluates. I'm going to wait for 5 seconds. That will trigger the get metrics to fetch me the temperature for the past 10 seconds. and then in the conditional we'll look at these values and find if there is within this array of data from a time series database a value, minimum value, which is bigger than 15. All right, so let me stop that and start again, and let's see what happens. I'm going to push temperature 23. Now we have to count 5 seconds. All right, we got this one metric here, and we had a condition which was actually true, which meant that we had in the past 10 seconds a minimum value which was above 15. Now let me do it again and push value 2. If I do that, we'll now trigger delay sensor. It will wait for 5 seconds. It fetch collect data, and then we'll look back here, and indeed now we have fetched value 2. That is what we see here, and this threshold crossing was below 15. Now, one thing about delay sensor that may be just interesting to note is that if we push another event in shorter than 5 seconds, we're gonna then start counting from the very beginning, which means is that if I push, let's say now 2, and then push it 2 again, it's just gonna reset delay and wait again 5 seconds. And this is when it's gonna trigger. And again, we're gonna fetch these values, and then we check for a condition. Thank you very much, and till next time. Bye-bye.